Hi everyone, this is Richard. We are going to talk about static typing. If you remember from last time, we were talking about dynamic typing, where a variable could be either an integer or a string or a float or really take any other value. Static type, well, Dart is, first of all, it's optionally typed, so you can use dynamic typing or static typing. Static typing is a little bit different. Instead of var, you are going to use a different type. Here we are going to use integers. The type would be int a equals 1. This is the type. This is the variable, of course. Here is the value. And if you go ahead and print, it'll act the same way as if you used var. Result down below, a equals 1. But here, a cannot equal a string. It will give you an error. That's because you said in the beginning, from the beginning, I am declaring that this variable will be an integer. It could change, so we could change a equals 2 or 3, and that will still work as long as it is an integer. But it cannot equal a float. It cannot equal, that gives you an error again, value of type double. We'll get into that in a second, by the way. It cannot equal a floating point. It cannot equal a string. There are other types that we can have. String. Well, actually, let's go through double. If you remember in one of my earlier talks, we talked about floating point precision. And there is single point precision, double precision. Dart only has double precision floating point. So the type name is going to be double. And that's why it's called that instead of float. It has to equal a decimal. You cannot make it an integer even, interestingly, or else it will give you an error right there. All right, so it will have to be a integer, even if it's 3.0, even if it's a 0.0, but it has to be it has to be a decimal at all times. If you don't know what your variable is going to be, if you think it's going to be an integer, but it could be a double or a floating point, a decimal point, you can always give it the type num. So that will be, it'll definitely be a number. Whether integer, floating point, doesn't really make a difference. C can equal an integer. Notice I'm getting no error. The editor is helping me out here. And C could also equal, and that'll work just as well. I think I already mentioned this, but if I didn't, I will just clarify. You declare it only once. Once you declare it, the computer now knows from now on C is a variable, and I will pay. You can use C in any manner that you wish, and you can reassign the value at any time. Okay. There are a number of other possibilities. String, that's another type of value. So string D equals hello. Again, D will always equal a string. It will never equal anything else. There's bool. Bool stands for Boolean, true or false. That's all you got. True or false. No other real values other than that, except for one, and we will go through that exception. Null. Null is the value that all of these integer, double, number, string, Boolean, all of these can have the value null if you don't actually initialize the variable, So you declare integer a, okay, but you don't actually give it a value. The value will be null, all right? So even though a should be an integer, negative number, 0, positive number, it can also equal null. Same thing with strings. Remember, case sensitive, so it has to be a capital S, everything else is lowercase. So the string value is null. Boolean, remember I said it could be true or false? Well, I didn't tell you the whole truth. It could be null as well. And that's, instead of, other languages may say undefined, by definition in Dart, if you don't initialize the variable, give it a value, it will be null. When you think about this, we were talking before about strong versus weak typing, right? So if you remember, strong versus weak typing, if you have a string, for example, string D equals 44, in some languages, that string would be converted into a number, or sometimes the number would be converted into a string. When you think about a statically typed language, I'm not even sure if that's possible. Certainly it isn't in Dart, because you've already declared the variable is a string, and therefore this cannot be a number or take the value of a number. Same thing, if you make it a number or an integer or a double, you cannot turn it into a string itself. So that's why it's strongly typed and optionally typed as well. That's what where Dart is coming from. My personal preference, if you can, always try to statically type. You don't have to, and sometimes you honestly don't really know what the variable will stand for, and if you have to use var in a pinch, just go ahead and use it. But if you can go back and or just practice on a regular basis using statically typed notation, that would be the best. The reason why I think it's going to be the best is mostly because, remember, the Dart editor is there to help you. It will point out problems that you have, and the more you put into it, the more it'll give you feedback in terms of you're having a problem with your logic, your flaws in what you think may be good. It'll give you feedback and say maybe, hey, your code isn't as solid as you think it is. A few other types. There's actually a bunch of different types, but I'm just going to go over two more just because I have seen them shown in many of the tutorials for Dart. So const and final. All right, so const basically means that, and you can put const int or const string or anything like that. You don't absolutely have to do that though. Basically, it means that this value right here, the value for the variable is set pretty much in stone. This thing, when you start to run the program, it has an established value. As opposed to final, it simply connects the variable with this value in a relationship form. So in other words, const says y equals 3, and it will always be 3. It cannot change for something like that. Final says, so for example, final says t is equal to this thing right over here, but this thing may actually change. For example, what if t equaled the time of day? The time of day can change. So the relationship t will still equal the time of day, but the time of day value will actually change. So that relationship that t equals the time of day is still there, and it's still valid, and it is final, and you cannot change it. It cannot be tomorrow's day, time of day. It cannot equal the integer. It cannot equal anything else. Const basically means that y equals, it cannot equal the time of day. It has to be actual time, because that time of day can change, and that is not allowable in const. So that's the difference between the two of them. Okay, so let's go over a few other things while we're at it. When we print, I want to throw this inside of here. There's several ways of doing it. If, for example, we can say print a, and we'll just give a value 3. Okay, there are other ways of doing it. You can print it as if it's a string. Okay, the value of a is $a. This is what we call string interpolation. Using the $, and when you do that within quotation marks, immediately following this will be a variable, and it will read what the variable is and print that out also. So it should say the value of a is 3. And that's what it actually shows. And you could put a period right there, because all Dart is going to read is the variable immediately following. So the period will be there as well. What if you want to say $3? What you would do is you'd have to turn this into a raw variable, which you do a backslash. Okay, backslash dollar basically says anything that follows the backslash, one character, is going to be typed. The computer is not going to acknowledge it. It's kind of like a comment, basically. So $3, basically a comment with one character, and then there's the string interpolation right there. Okay, it's pretty nifty. It's nice that if you have to list a number of variables at a time, so C, A, D, and it'll all list it right in a row. Okay, so I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you very much.